Picture, if you will, a theme park attraction, a winding lane through a hotel lobby caked with the colorless cobwebs of fallen dreams. A hazy arena that echoes the unmade memories of a bygone era. This is the Hollywood Tower Hotel, and it's the setting for our scene tonight. Constructed in the acme of the Golden Age, this former citadel for the footlights of industry now lies desolate, crumbling, seemingly abandoned, and yearning to tell a story. A morbid curiosity invites inside the careless wanderer to a most unusual elevator, a lift supervised by a fashionable porter. His name, Rod Serling. Age, uncertain. Occupation, yarn weaver of the highest distinction and the cryptic wielder of many mysteries. An elevator, as you may be aware, has one particular function: to raise one up to the height they desire. A lifting portal that delivers the traveler to a myriad of destinations with the most convincing illusion of control. But rarely is this the case. With an ominous ding, the sinister whisper of sliding doors reveal the first sentences of uncharted chapters. Chapters of levity. Chapters of calamity. With a touch of supernatural folly and unhappened history, we're boarding this elevator once again. But tonight we're taking a detour. And our bellman, Mr. Serling, is about to find out he wasn't the first occupant of this curious hotel. You are about to discover what lied before the fifth dimension. A quick stop and drop to the deepest and darkest levels of the might have been in the Twilight Zone.
Hot two, ziggity bing bong boom, hot two. 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 Hot two, hot two, hot two. Hot two. Hot two.
The Disney parks are a wonderful place full of many stories and experiences to enjoy. But the fact of the matter is, for every great story we get to experience in the parks, hundreds more are left on the development floor. Some may be casual suggestions with great potential, others boast years of planning, accruing layouts, story treatments, concept art, and more. Most ideas only get this far, never truly achieving the ability to spread their wings and officially get off the ground. Of the many unproduced, there's always been one attraction nearer the top of canceled projects that had piqued my interest. I often wonder what it may have been like, how it would have lasted had it panned out. Something relatively bizarre, pretty interesting, and very specific. Consider an alternate timeline where instead of the beloved Tower of Terror, there was a thrilling audio-animatronic dark ride based on and around the hilarious comedy of director Mel Brooks. Disney MGM Studios, the original moniker for what is now Hollywood Studios, was a much different place when it opened in May of 1989. In a very similar vein as the quickly impending Universal Studios Orlando, MGM Studios was a theme park tribute to the golden age of Hollywood, dedicated to the art of show business and its many facets. Through a variety of experiences, movies, theater, music, and more would all be daily celebrated inside. The true specifics of the park's origins can be debated, but certainly the heavy authority behind the entire project was the then Walt Disney Company CEO, Michael Eisner. History recalls Eisner's time at Disney interestingly. For what it's worth, and to his credit, I think he was a leader willing to take big risks to give the masses what they wanted. Sometimes this involved unprecedented expansion, but often this came at the cost of shortcuts and rapid development. These risks, for better or for worse, contributed to his legacy, and it's a tenure I'm considerably grateful for. And whatever your opinion of him is currently, we can all thank him for the inception of MGM Studios. Right from the get-go, MGM Studios was bringing in the audience, almost to a fault. The park and its handful of attractions just didn't have the capacity to meet the demand. And for a good chunk of its history, it was correctly considered to be a half-day park. So Imagineering was quickly tasked with creating creative new experiences to increase guest offerings within the park. Opening day, MGM Studios hosted unique entertainment venues with various behind-the-scenes shows in its two main ride attractions, the Studio Backlot Tour and the Great Movie Ride. In spite of the great appeal that these attractions offered, according to guest surveys being given at the time, there was an air of disappointment surrounding the studios, mainly due to its lack of a genuine thrill ride attraction. So it was clear, audiences wanted thrill, and Michael Eisner was ready to give it to them. So as Imagineering evaluated the studios, they discovered a specific lack of a particularly thrilling movie genre, and that genre was modern horror. Now, for the record, I can't stand horror movies. I know I must be in some kind of minority, but I find most of what is considered modern horror to be incredibly lazy and just terrible. In my honest opinion, horror relies on gore, grotesque makeup, and jump scares to inspire emotion that, for the most part, is incredibly unearned. To me, there are zero redeeming qualities within the horror genre. I firmly, boldly, unabashedly just don't get it. It's worth noting, I think, that there is an important distinction between horror and suspense. Horror goes boo and expects you to scream and clap. Suspense might say boo, but before it does, it'll build an exciting tension, it'll psychologically torment you, and it allows you, the viewer, to feel a part of the story. Creating suspense within a film requires a special talent. Horror jump scares do not. Or at least that's my personal hot take. But we're not talking about suspense because Michael Eisner wanted horror. And under his urging, Imagineering was exploring and workshopping different horror genre properties to bring into the studios in a thrill ride capacity, believing it to be the right way to check the box that MGM guests were leaving empty. The thing is, because horror is such a polar opposite of what Disney represents, they instantly realized that they didn't have any true horror titles in the Disney catalog to borrow from. So, according to Disney historian Jim Hill, Imagineering looked into acquiring the theme park rights of other established horror properties to base thrill rides around in the park. Movies like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street were explored. Attractions based on the works of Stephen King and Night of the Living Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre were all considered. Ugh. These suggestions just activate my heartburn. I can't envision these extreme properties even remotely working within a Disney theme park. Because, here I go again, fundamentally, Disney, boiled down to a general thesis, is about the triumph over evil. It's about the light defeating the dark. It's about the noble and the good of heart, without exception, winning over hate in the end. It's why the often suggested fifth dark park dedicated to villains would never work. Case in point, Disney's truest attempt at this horror idea, Alien Encounter in the Magic Kingdom, as interesting as it was, just didn't work out in the long run because it was so contrary to literally everything else around it, but I digress. So thankfully, and certainly not surprisingly, Imagineering struggled to find a workable way to employ any of these horror franchises within the park. But luckily, a new approach was suggested that could potentially bridge the gap. They thought, why don't we take the spookiness of a haunted house, fill it with characters of classic movie monsters, but then we'll balance it out with a lighter, more humorous attitude. This concept was far more suited for the studios, in my opinion, and Imagineering started to run with it. The truth is, everybody gets scared at some point. Nobody likes to be startled, but we can all agree it's funnier when we can watch fear overtake someone else. To me, that's the beauty of the horror comedy genre. Some of my favorite comedies are within this particular category. It's maybe a little cruel, but overall hilarious to watch other people get scared, especially those who are easily scared. The genius of classic horror comedy is that it allows the viewer to always be smarter than the film's protagonists. In searching for the actuality and the silliness of a spooky situation, we as the viewer are instilled with a remarkable type of bravery. In a broader and even applicable sense, finding humor where our film's main characters don't allows us, the viewer, the ability to choose overall that the things in our real lives that truly frighten us, truthfully, aren't that frightening after all. These types of films can teach us that fear is not something to indulge, but rather something to laugh in the face of. Horror comedy, when done well, should be just as laugh-inducing as it is cathartic and uniquely empowering. And in a more general way, this intention supports that more fundamental Disney ideal. Horror comedy is a great genre that has its roots in classic Hollywood, a concept perfectly fit for what was MGM Studios. Comedy staples like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, or The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, and The Cat and the Canary. They're all spooky slapstick that hold up strong even today. But certainly, there were few who pulled off the genre better than Mel Brooks.
Once an inarticulate mass of lifeless tissues, may I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town. Hit it! If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
Mel Brooks is one of the funniest filmmakers of all time. He entered the scene writing for comedy legend Sid Caesar on Your Show of Shows and would go on to find notable popularity as the 2,000-year-old man with Carl Reiner. Soon after, he would co-create the beloved television program Get Smart before heading to the big screen with his first directorial debut called The Producers. The film was praised for its shocking hilarity and wild satire. The Producers would earn him an Oscar for screenwriting and seal his legacy over the comedy landscape. But it was just the beginning. For over the next several decades, he would go on to make generations laugh, with hilarious send-ups of multiple genres, with movies like Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, and Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Farce and parody was his wheelhouse, and it was clear that his greatest strength was his keen ability to subvert expectations to remarkable comedic effect. And was that ever true in his magnum opus, Young Frankenstein? By the time MGM Studios debuted, Michael Eisner had already been stoking the fires for a Disney-Brooks collaboration. In fact, early concept art for the Great Movie Ride proposed that Young Frankenstein would be one of the great movies featured. In 1988, upon learning that Mel Brooks and his son Max were big fans of Disneyland, Michael Eisner invited them both to the Disney studio in Burbank, California, with the long-term hope of maybe convincing Mel of a working partnership. Mel gladly accepted the invitation, and Michael Eisner toured him around the facility with these ulterior motives in mind. He then showcased to Mel the life-size recreation of New York's famous Plaza Hotel. It was a huge set that was created for the Touchstone Pictures movie, Big Business, that was filmed right there on the Disney lot. It was a multi-million-dollar set, and Eisner was curious if Mel could recycle it for a project in any way. And so he asked him, "Could you recycle this set for a project in any way?" Immediately, Mel saw the set and deemed it perfect for a zany sitcom set in a hotel. And that was that. Shortly thereafter, in 1989, the Nuthouse, produced by Mel Brooks and shot on the Walt Disney Studios lot, would air on NBC.
Listen, keep a lid on it. I can tell by the looks of you, you're nothing but troublemakers here to raise hell.
Ultimately, the Nuthouse was a short-lived program. Set in the once prestigious Nuthouse Hotel, the show observed the quirky staff as they attempted, against big opposition, to return the hotel to its former prominence. It starred Brooks regulars Cloris Leachman and Harvey Korman in hilarious leading roles. The program was clearly a Mel Brooks production, a very visual show filled with a steady barrage of punny one-liners and humorous sight gags. The jokes came fast and furious, and perhaps that's why at the time it failed to find an audience. It was a program you couldn't just watch, it required you to pay attention. While 10 episodes were filmed, the Nuthouse was canceled too soon, after airing only 5. Though as it turns out, it wouldn't be the last Disney Mel Brooks hotel idea on the docket. Many of the Nuthouse sets used would again be repurposed, but this time as decoration in the former soundstage restaurant within MGM Studios. Despite the unfortunate flop of the Nuthouse, the Brooks-Disney relationship was forged, and Eisner was always on the hunt for the next potential collaboration. In the meantime, Mel worked with Disney, starring in the Disney Park short film Mickey's Audition. The 5-minute feature, a fusion of live action and animation, was produced in 1989 at the MGM Studios to play continuously in one of the soundstages. The film, set in the heyday of Hollywood and chock full of celebrity cameos, showcased the arrival of Mickey Mouse to Hollywood, where he auditions for his first film role. The director that Mickey auditions for, of course, is none other than Mel Brooks, although here he plays the role of Mel DeMille. The film also featured Michael Eisner, Dom DeLuise, and even included Roy E. Disney playing the role of his uncle. The film played for a short season in MGM Studios in 1989, and then again for several years in the mid-90s at the Main Street Cinema in the Magic Kingdom. And so that brought Disney to the present, a desire for a horror ride in the studios and the hopes for some Mel Brooks-style parody to soften the delivery. While reportedly being reluctant from the start, Imagineering convinced Mel by showcasing some potential possibilities they were working on, as well as emphasizing the overall value of headlining a brand new attraction in a growing theme park. Over the next year, Mel Brooks met multiple times on the phone and in person with the minds of Imagineering, collaborating and trying to hammer down a specific ride idea. Mel Brooks really wanted to recreate aspects of his film Young Frankenstein for the attraction, and some of the first concepts for the ride borrowed heavily from the film. It went by the working title of Castle Young Frankenstein, and much like the film's proposed scene in the Great Movie Ride, it would have recreated certain vignettes from the film. The queue would have been set in a Bavarian village and would have been very reminiscent of the Pirates of the Caribbean line in the Magic Kingdom, weaving throughout the themed town. While the idea of Gene Wilder in audio animatronic form is a dream come true to me, Imagineering couldn't quite shape the whole vision and kept workshopping the idea. So, Brooks kept calling and Imagineering kept tweaking. Meanwhile, another idea that was being thrown around MGM Studios at the time was one of adding an expensive, high-end 5-star hotel as a visual focal point at the entrance of the park. Guests would be able to stay in this hotel themed up in the elegant Art Deco style of the mid-century. One of the perks of staying there would be the hotel's literal connection to the park, as guests would be able to access the studios from their own exclusive entrance. This idea was being heavily explored when one of the Imagineers thought, what if we connected the two ideas? 5-star hotel and this horror ride. One end of the hotel would be high class and operating smoothly, the other side, park side, would appear dilapidated, condemned, and abandoned, dedicated to this new Mel Brooks ride. This pairing was the winner, and as Imagineering kept brainstorming, the Brooks attraction reached its final stages with the most fleshed out concept called Mel Brooks' Hollywood Horror Hotel. Though, according to lead Imagineer McNair Wilson, Mel would suggest, say horror slowly, or it's no longer a family ride. And so, for safety reasons around Imagineering, it was often referred to as Hotel Mel. The general ride synopsis was this. Famous Hollywood film director Mel Brooks was shooting a movie at the studios in the abandoned and potentially haunted portion of this hotel, and we as MGM Studios guests would be invited to the hot set to check it out. We'd first be enticed as we'd see an elegant hotel turned forgotten as we enter into the park. The hotel would serve as this towering visual centerpiece for the brand new area of the park called Sunset Boulevard. It would have been a considerable contrast from our first visions of the hotel, and as concept art suggests, it would have been pretty spooky from the outside. As we'd get in line, we'd be met with more of the overall premise and pre-show. Overhead monitors would display Mel Brooks somewhere within the hotel shooting the new picture. So focused on the task at hand, he appears pretty oblivious to the actual haunted happenings going on around him. As the line proceeded, Mel would eventually receive a spark of inspiration. Perhaps us guests passing through the set could be included as extras in the movie. But just like show business, no one gets in the picture before auditioning, so before anything else, we would have to audition for Mel himself. We'd then be directed to board the quote special Disney golf carts. These would be our humorous ride vehicles that would transport us through the hotel attraction. Somewhat channeling the Haunted Mansion, the ride was a vast collection of semi-disconnected humorous vignettes throughout the hotel. Each scene would be full of visual gags, of movement, of Pepper's ghost effects, and audio animatronics. We'd drive through the hotel lobby where we'd first encounter the iconic Hunchback of Notre Dame, Quasimodo, where we can see he's taken on the important role of the bellboy. We would ride through the hotel kitchen where we'd see a trio of goofy-looking witches cooking something spooky over a batch of cauldrons. As we roll through, we'd see a long tentacle emerge from one of the said cauldrons and begin stirring the contents of a nearby pot. Another crowded scene would have had us entering into a hotel bathroom of sorts where a handful of iconic movie monsters could be seen conducting their, business. We'd see the villainous Count Dracula struggling at the bathroom sink trying to shave, particularly challenged because he can't see his reflection. At the next sink, we would see the Wolfman carefully grooming his face. And as we'd exit this bathroom scene, we'd be facing a set of bathroom stalls and would witness one of the more humorous gags of the attraction. While the doors of the stall would be closed, we'd easily be able to identify the feet of Frankenstein's monster in one of them, very much alive and in the struggling thick of a morning constitutional. It quickly becomes apparent that he has run out of toilet paper. Luckily, next door, another movie monster is doing his thing, and it's the Mummy. Frankenstein's monster, simple-minded and unassuming as he is, seems to have found the solution to his pressing problem and, well, you get it. It's just a whole scene of tasteful bathroom humor. One of the more unique aspects of the attraction would be its element of surprise. A handful of the audio animatronic set pieces would be placed on specially designed turntables, much like you'd see in attractions like Carousel of Progress or Country Bear Jamboree. These audio animatronics would surely be performing some goofy horror-related gag. The brilliance of these set pieces, though, would be that at random times during the day, with no predictability or explanation, the turntables would rotate into an alternate scene, changing the audio animatronic set piece into a similarly dressed set, but in the place of the audio animatronic, there would have been a live actor instead. This actor could be performing similarly, ready to break character and jump out at the passing golf carts, or more likely, these actors would have the freedom to improvise something completely different than their audio animatronic counterpart, acting out an entirely new, humorous, horror-related gag. This would make every ride experience particularly unique, and for repeat riders, there was suddenly an extra element of suspense, as we'd never quite know if we'd see an impressive audio animatronic in front of us, or if instead we'd be treated to something living and dynamic, something we had never seen before. The ride would continue throughout hotel corridors and fancy ballrooms and bring us to the climax of the attraction, where we'd finally make it to the hot set and an audio animatronic Mel Brooks atop a moving crane camera would direct us to scream for our audition. And then it would have been done. We'd be on the way to the gift shop that would have surely been full of properly branded merchandise. This is just the framework, of course, and certainly only scratching the surface of the development that likely took place for Hotel Mel. The final product clearly would have seen more vignettes, more fleshed out scenes, layered with even more gags and puns, perhaps a handful of celebrity cameos, and surely some edgy, self-aware, fourth wall breaking comedy, the latter especially being where I think a Mel Brooks-led theme park attraction would have thrived. As the Imagineering talks with Mel Brooks kept on, the gags and the jokes continued to grow, as did the estimated cost. Each additional scene, each animatronic, each live actor, each extra element was adding to the overall price tag. And thus an important question kept arising that everybody was failing to answer. Was it worth it? Would it pay off? Does it make sense? Each query seemed to raise more questions than answers. Why were we in the hotel? Was it really haunted, or was it just a farce? Were these real monsters, or were the actors playing monsters? Were we a part of the filmmaking process, or just driving through? Was it too tame or too goofy for the task at hand? And ultimately, did it meet the level of thrill that had prompted the whole project in the first place? With all of these issues to address, Mel and the Imagineers just couldn't quite hammer down a solution to them while maintaining a cohesive story, and so, on good terms, Mel Brooks and Imagineering mutually parted ways. Mel would transfer his focus to starring in and directing the movie Life Stinks, and thus Hotel Mel officially entered the might have been for Walt Disney Imagineering. I really wish they could have made it work, but I'd be curious to have seen how the longevity of an attraction like Hotel Mel would have lasted. Sadly, Mel Brooks hasn't directed a movie in decades, and perhaps the timeless comedy delivered through these dated characters would be waning thin, if not gone entirely, in the very different landscape of a present-day Hollywood studios. Of course, the same could be said about the Twilight Zone, an on-again, off-again anthology series from the early 1960s, and, that's working out pretty well too. As much as I love the idea of Hotel Mel, I can't be upset with the consolation prize. Even if you aren't an avid fan of the original series, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is one of the greatest overall experiences in Walt Disney World. It's a masterpiece of Imagineering, and as far as theming and storytelling is concerned, there are few attractions that I would choose over it. But interestingly enough, if it wasn't for the brainstorming that occurred during Imagineering meetings for Hotel Mel, firstly, they wouldn't have landed on the hotel concept at all, and secondly, they possibly wouldn't have discovered one of the driving inspirations for the Tower of Terror either.
The next meeting with Mel, and I brought in one of those ring bell for service bells I could have on the desk of an old hotel. And we went around the table just with the knuckleheads and Mel, telling the story one sentence at a time. All right, you go into the hotel and it's locked, so you have to push the side thing and this and this and this. And the elevator doesn't work, so you end up down in the steam room in the basement, and you find the service elevator, and you get on the service elevator. It doesn't have a door, just has a chain sliding kind of enclosure, and you get on, you go up and up and up, and you see the different floors, and this happens, and this happens. And you get to the top floor, bing, ring the bell. And then somebody says, and you get to the top floor, and the whole elevator kind of shakes a little bit, and the door flies open, and your elevator comes out of the shaft and goes down the hall. And there was this silence, and then we all burst into laughter. And Mel looks at me and says, can we do that? Can we do that? And I said, well, I know a guy. He says, you know a guy? I said, I know a guy.
The guy was an Imagineer. Imagineering was full of imaginative minds and creators who could make the impossible possible. Of course there would be a way for an elevator to leave its shaft. And with some talented Imagineers behind the scenes, nothing was off the table and the drop ride concept would be fully developed. Tower of Terror opened on July 22nd, 1994, and while no Disney guests can officially check in, it certainly delivers on the stomach-churning thrill that Michael Eisner was after without going full-on horror. It manages to be psychological and suspenseful, which is way more intense than any of the modern horror ideas that Imagineers had considered. The fusion of Rod Serling with the minds at Imagineering, while completely unconventional on paper, in action is the perfect combination and the perfect response to a request for thrill. The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is one of the best moods you can find on campus. While the Tower of Terror doesn't fully model any particular episode of the series, it echoes its sentiments in every corner. The dread, the tension, the build-up, and the payoff. As soon as you enter into the overgrowth of the eerily abandoned Hollywood Tower Hotel courtyard, you are catapulted into a story. Even if you are unaware of the events that transpired in October of 1939, you are filled with a clear sensation that something strange has happened there. The echoey screams from above confirm a feeling that carries over into and throughout the entire attraction as you live out firsthand that haunting predicament from long ago in a special episode of The Twilight Zone written especially for you. There's a stark contrast between The Twilight Zone and Mel Brooks. They're two entities that you wouldn't expect to share a conversation. But within Imagineering, anything and everything is possible. And without Hotel Mel, there very well could have been no Tower of Terror. The horror comedy intentions of Mel Brooks, I think, would have mixed perfectly with the classic Hollywood homage that was Sunset Boulevard. But honestly, I can't imagine a trip to the studios without the strange comfort of seeing that triumphant hotel at the end of the block. I love the Hollywood studios of today, and I love the idea of this attraction, and I hope someday these sentiments can be fused together into a new attraction. You know, my hope for all future attractions is that there will always be a priceless value placed on laughter. But until then, I'll never not wonder how a quick visit to the Hotel Mel would have been. Until next time, we'll see you in the happy place.
As legendary experiences tower from the ground, their origins are often found within the trampled remains of imperfect ideas. Where some chapters develop and thrive in 3 dimensions, most stories never leave the paper, taunting the imagination to saunter about amidst the endless depths of pleasant potentiality, only for a brief moment before a turbulent plunge into the Twilight Zone.
Bye.